Dick Cavett was referred to as the host of The Thinking Person. He conducted interviews with Muhammad Ali, Janis Joplin, and Jimi Hendrix. Nixon was so enraged by him that he was named 26 times on the Watergate tapes. However, things began to go apart at some point. On live TV, a guest passed away in front of him. Cancer claimed the life of his 42-year married wife. The house they had created together was destroyed by fire. And then, in 2020, at the age of 83, something occurred that altered everything once more. After decades of questioning, the man now has questions he cannot answer. The narrative of Dick Cavett starts with a minor perplexity that followed him for the remainder of his life. On November 19, 1936, he was born. And everyone agrees that Buffalo County, Nebraska, was the location. Everyone disagrees about the town. Although his family was from Gibbon, his birth certificate states that he was born in Kearney. Because Gibbon lacked a hospital, his mother was transported to Kearney to give birth, which led to the confusion. Although it seems straightforward, biographies still dispute it today. Some say Kearney, while others say Gibbon. The fact that Cavett himself varied his response according on the questioner just added to the mystery. And one of the most contentious aspects of his early existence was that little detail, the kind that most people never consider again. Like that shifting birth tale, his childhood continued to move. His parents, Alva Cavett and Arabelle Richards, were educators who took positions wherever they could. Grand Island came after Gibbon and Comstock. It felt like a new town with each school year. The family moved to Grand Island when Dick was still very small, and he was able to enroll in music kindergarten at Wasmer Elementary. Both parents were able to secure better teaching jobs in Lincoln 3 years later. The family then packed once again. Before attending Lincoln High, he attended Capital, Prescott, and Irving for the remainder of his musical education. He was formed by such continuous movements. They gave him flexibility. They piqued his interest. As an interviewer, he was able to read a room with ease because to their instruction. But in 1946, everything was different. Dick's mother passed away from cancer at the age of 36 when he was just 10. It happened fast and left a lasting, profound impression. During the years when he most needed her, her absence descended upon him and altered the way he listened to others. Because he experienced sadness and loss stories at such a young age, he became sensitive to them. Guests felt that he knew what it meant to hurt when they opened up on his show many years later. This early trauma was the source of that link, music, a wound that molded the serene seriousness that underpinned his comedy. From then on, life continued to change. In the late 1940s, his father, Alva, wedded Dorcas Stand, another Lincoln educator. Together, they rose to prominence in the community's educational system, becoming well known to successive generations of pupils. The Dorcas C. and Alva B. Cavett Elementary School was established on September 24, 1995, as a result of their enormous influence. The dedication ceremony was packed with former students and local officials who recalled how those two educators had subtly influenced the city's youth for many years. Dick saw that occasion as a celebration of his childhood home. A house full with teachings, books, and the conviction that education was important. Amidst all of this, an unforeseen event was taking place. Dick Cavett was growing into an athlete despite his diminutive stature. He tried gymnastics under the guidance of his father, who believed his son was too light for basketball or football. He quickly became accustomed to it. He became the state gymnastics champion for Nebraska by the early 1950s, with a pommel horse specialty. It was a difficult event that called both control and balance, two skills he worked on daily. He took home the state championship in 1954. That triumph gave him confidence that he would carry into television and propelled him ahead in ways he didn't yet completely comprehend. Another setting in which he flourished was school. With a reputation that extended well beyond athletics, he attended Lincoln High School and graduated in 1954 with a degree in music. According to reports, he had the highest IQ ever measured in the public school system in Lincoln. His curiosity was observed by the teachers. His appeal was noticed by his peers. In addition to leading a live Saturday morning radio program supported by the Junior League, he was elected president of the Student Council. He met students like Sandy Dennis, who would go on to become a well-known actress. His accomplishments reflected the teachings he had learned from his parents, which helped him reach greater heights. As the athlete and the intelligent student were being observed, another thing was subtly developing. Magic was Dick Cavett's secret passion. He began practicing illusions for friends as a child and gradually developed it into a side gig. He was doing magic shows for $35 a night by the time he was a teenager. He received guidance from local magician Gene Glory, who helped him refine every aspect. Cavett received Music, the Best New Performer prize at the International Brotherhood of Magicians Convention in St. Louis in 1952, when he was 15 years old. Card tricks and vibrant scarves were part of his magic show. He learned how to stand in front of an audience and get them to lean in from these early performances. He even met 11-year-old Johnny Carson at a magic show in Lincoln one day. At the time, neither realized how profoundly their lives would intersect in television history. Mischief blended with all that discipline. Along the way, Cavett and his pals participated in the whitewashing of the William Jennings Bryan statue at the state capitol of Nebraska. At the time, he was around 16. Because the statue honors one of the most significant political personalities in Nebraska's history, the prank created a commotion. Later, Cavett grinned and acknowledged it, referring to it as teenage folly. However, the practical joke exposed a different side of him, a light-hearted disobedience that eventually manifested in the witty banter of his interviews. He was captivated by music, entertainment even before he graduated from high school. By 8th grade, he was directing a radio program. He performed in school plays with music. He worked magic at little gatherings. Radio, comedy, magic, gymnastics, drama, and student council. Everything pointed him in the direction of a public life. He was paving the way for television, even if he was unaware of it at the time. His next move came in 1954. He left Nebraska with a rail ticket and a scholarship to attend Yale. His parents were teachers with meager wages, so it seemed nearly unthinkable that their son would attend an Ivy League university. Cavett left Lincoln on a music midnight train, passed through Chicago, and arrived in New York. His parents soothed him when he fearfully inquired what he would do if the task became too difficult, and he quickly demonstrated that he belonged. In his first year, he was on the dean's list. When affluent classmates at Yale asked him questions like, "Where did you prep?" Cavett simply said, "I didn't prep, I hide." He continued to study, continued to take in information, and discover a new world that combined opportunity and intelligence. However, something darker came into his life that same freshman year. He experienced his first depressive episode at the age of 18. It started out lightly but got heavier till it was hard to get out of bed. He considered going home. He felt overwhelmed, empty, and cut off. He compared it later to a sick dog pleading to be left alone. It became so bad that he was admitted to the hospital under a false identity. There were also times when he thought about taking his own life. His lifelong battle, which he kept largely secret for decades, began with that first event. It demonstrated that even a bright, self-assured young man might struggle with intense internal conflicts. And yet he pressed on. He immersed himself in comedy and play at Yale. He participated in school musicals and gave performances on the campus radio station WIBC. He changed his major from English to acting in his senior year and graduated in 1958. His colleagues were captivated by his intense, musical performances in plays such as The Crucible. He was a show director. He read scripts. He kept a close eye on actresses. He learned timing, rhythm, and tale from these experiences. He was developing a new talent in addition to music and the theater industry. After immersing himself in Yale's comedy culture, he developed a sardonic sense of cerebral humor that set him apart from other comedians. His instructors, particularly the philosopher Paul Weiss, who encouraged pupils to think critically and communicate well, had an impact on him. In all of his interviews, Cavett maintained that tone. He posed queries that others would never have considered. He combined wit with seriousness, charm, and wisdom. At first, Dick Cavett's path into show business didn't appear to be straightforward. He worked as a copyboy at Time magazine in the early 1960s, doing errands, and making just enough money to maintain a modest Manhattan apartment. However, the work provided him with everything he needed. It gave him access to the world he desired and provided him with enough alone to work on jokes after work. While looking through the magazine one day, he came upon an article regarding Jack Parr's difficulties coming up with Tonight Show monologue material. He never forgot that line. He kept thinking about it until he caved in, composed a series of jokes, put them in a time envelope, and entered the RCA building as if he belonged there. He entered the corridor and was startled to see Parr standing, music, just in front of him. Gathering all his courage, Cavett extended the envelope. After giving it a quick look and saying, "All right, kid," in a weary tone, Parr continued to move. As he sat in the audience that evening, wondering if anything would come of it, Cavett gradually came to see that Parr was genuinely making use of his gags. He felt as though something inside of him was being ignited by each line. His life, music, began to take a different turn after that night. He would always remember that audacious decision. When the jokes finally made it to the stage, he recalled how anxious he was to slide the envelope into Parr's hand and how the whole situation seemed too good to be true. He wasn't exactly showered with accolades from Parr. However, every time he reflected on how almost he left without saying anything, he recalled, music, those words, "All right, kid." In 1960, such gags got him a spot on Parr's show as a writer. All of a sudden, he was penning monologues for the show's most popular segment 5 days a week. He discovered how rapidly a joke could end if it was delivered even a second late, as well as how swiftly live television moved. He met people who gave him more opportunities, and the pace hardened him. When Parr departed in 1962, Cavett had changed from being an outsider. He had previously shown that he was capable of keeping up. Cavett became one of the original head writers of The Tonight Show when Johnny Carson took over in 1962. His role evolved from writing jokes to mentoring other writers, ensuring that each line matched Carson's pace and voice. Cavett had to think more quickly and sharply because of Carson's style. He needed to produce humor that would appeal to a national audience and adapt to a new pace. Before leaving with lessons he applied for the remainder of his career. He remained with Carson until 1964. He gained credibility over those years, and in television, credibility made a huge difference that talent alone could not. At the same time, he started writing for a person he had idolized since he was a young boy. Cavett ultimately provided Groucho Marx with comedic material while his guest headlined The Tonight Show for a while. He was astonished by the encounter. Marx was already a legend in his 70s. Nevertheless, he was kind to Cavett and even gave him counsel. It was a new type of delight, something more profound than watching Parr or Carson read Marx's jokes, Cavett recalled. Over time, their friendship deepened, and in 1972, Cavett gave the legend a stage full of a new generation by introducing Marx at Carnegie Hall. Cavett learned from working with Marx how interviews flow and how comedic timing can make a moment seem longer or shorter. He applied that concept to all of his television conversations. His life outside the studio also progressed. He married Carrie Nye, an actress he had met at Yale, on June 4, 1964. Cavett appreciated her discipline, and she had a witty sense of humor and a theatrical persona reminiscent of Tallulah Bankhead. Before she passed away in 2006, they were married for more than 40 years. Cavett frequently discussed how she carefully considered her duties and how stable she appeared in a constantly changing society. Their relationship, which was based on mutual respect and tacit support, endured despite the fact that they never had children. Her last performance was in the 2003 film In the Guiding Light, which was written by their friend Ellen Weston. Additionally, Cavett frequently expressed his pride in her work. They started a life together around the same time. Additionally, they purchased a property that quickly became a part of their narrative. They bought Tick Hall, a shingle-style cottage in Montauk built in 1883, in the middle of the 1960s. With 900 feet of Atlantic Ocean shoreline, the home was situated on about 20 acres. It was placed on the National Register of Historic Places and was part of the Seven Sisters, a music group of historic homes. In a 2003 documentary titled From the Ashes, Cavett and Nye reconstructed the original house exactly as music it had been when it burned down in 1997. The land ultimately sold for $23.6 million in 2021, and the new building was roughly 6,500 square feet with 6 bedrooms. Cavett frequently talked about how renovating the house felt like preserving the memories of their early marriage. When ABC offered him his own show in 1968, everything changed once more. Even though he had previously written behind the scenes for M.V. Griffin and Park Carson, this felt like a completely other experience. Buckminster Fuller was the first guest on his show when it debuted on March 4, 1968. This morning was a 90-minute show that combined comedy and topical conversation. Bobby Rosengarten led the music, which was aimed at young housewives. The difference between Cavett and other hosts was immediately apparent to the audience. His visitors responded to his interest when his interviews veered into contemplative area. Music, after moving to prime time, the show even faced off against Carson. Cavett's name gradually spread throughout the public consciousness. The Dick Cavett Show developed into a unique television program. It provided spectators with ideas rather than routines and conversations rather than performances. Each episode seemed like a breath of fresh air in a world full of fleeting giggles, and Cavett welcomed Gore Vidal, Patricia Neal, Muhammad Ali, Angela Lansbury, and many others. He discussed politics and technology in his first conversation with Buckminster Fuller, which established the tone for his future program. He was occasionally pressured by ABC to include more well-known celebrities, yet shows without music, celebrities occasionally received even higher ratings. In a field full of bigger voices, his reflective tone helped the presentation stand out. He quickly became known as the host of The Thinking Person. He knew how to persuade a guest to divulge something genuine, and his interviews felt sincere and nuanced. He had the same cool attention when conversing with academics, music artists, and politicians. He wasn't attempting to surpass Carson's humor, but his show ran head-to-head with Carson's. He was creating something new, something slower, something more intriguing. He was able to establish a long-lasting career on television thanks to that distinction. Then came one of the most bizarre scenes ever seen on television. Pioneer of the organic food movement Jerome Rodale made an appearance as a guest on Cavett's show on June 8, 1971. Rodale sat down next to Pete Hamill after his interview was over and declared that he was so healthy that he anticipated living forever. A few seconds later, he snorted and fell back as though he was sleeping. At first, Cavett believed music might be a prank, but something didn't feel right. "Is there a doctor in the audience?" he asked. Despite the efforts of 2 medical professionals to do mouth-to-mouth and CPR, Rodale was declared dead at Roosevelt Hospital at the age of 72. The episode was never broadcast. The tape was hidden and only Cavett had a copy, making the incident an eerie mystery. In the history of television, another moment made its mark: music. Georgia Governor Lester Maddox spoke with Jim Brown and Truman Capote about segregation on the broadcast on December 18, 1970. When Cavett used the term "the bigots who elected Maddox," it instantly incited ire. Without turning around, Maddox got up and left the set. Cavett kept the cameras going even when ABC executives asked them to stop. In its most unadulterated form, the scenario depicted the anxiety of the time: music. The New York Times reported on Maddox's hasty departure and his demand for an apology. One of the most talked-about incidents in talk show history was the walkout. Another odd twist was provided by the Rodale episode. Hundreds of individuals claimed to have seen it, despite the fact that it never aired. The false memory effect, which occurs when the mind fills in blank areas, music, with imagined features, was identified by researchers. In response to the accusations, Cavett stated that the episode had never been shown. People insisted they saw it, though. The story expanded till it became a sort of folklore after the lost episode was mentioned in documentaries. On September 18, 1970, Jimi Hendrix entered the Dick Cavett Show. He performed with a gentleness that startled many who were only familiar with his thunder, carrying the serenity of someone who had already lived multiple lifetimes. Additionally, his voice sounded contemplative in a way that fans seldom heard when he spoke with Cavett afterwards. He talked on how people continued to ask him about Woodstock. And he attempted to describe the weight of standing there in front of everyone. He acknowledged that being referred to as a guitar music legend occasionally felt more like a burden than a crown, and that the relentless touring tired him more than anyone could have imagined. The discourse drifted softly across the room as Kat listened with silent regard. Nobody in the studio realized they were witnessing one of his last public appearances. Only a few days before he passed away on September 25, 1970, at the age of 27, the program was shown. His composure that day, according to others, made the conversation eerie, as though he had been speaking from a position between brilliance and cracking. Music. A little earlier, on August 3, 1970, Janis Joplin made her farewell appearance on the same show, and she brought a new kind of enthusiasm. She sang passionately and laughed with Cavett, something she hardly ever did with interviewers, as she left with her signature blend of vulnerability and fire. She discussed how the music industry was evolving and how she was uncomfortable with concerts becoming more violent. Although she acknowledged that the industry annoyed her, she also claimed that Cavett made her feel secure. On camera, she referred to him as a buddy, and he grinned as though he knew exactly what that meant. On October 4, 1970, 2 months later, she accidentally overdosed on heroin and died at the age of 27. Because it showed a woman who continued to believe in music despite the world continuously breaking her spirit, that final interview remained etched in people's memories. Joplin and Cavett remained friends after the cameras stopped rolling. On occasion, they went out to supper together, left the studio, and stayed up late discussing life. Cavett claimed that when she lit what he mockingly referred to as a special cigarette, they would get into those protracted discussions that seemed to go on forever. She told other rock artists that he wasn't stiff or dull like some presenters, and she even urged them to perform his show because she trusted him so much. Every time she returned, that trust was evident on film. She appeared at ease. She seems to understand. And Cavett, Music, subsequently claimed that their relationship altered the program in unexpected ways. Janis revealed considerably more at her last appearance. She discussed how violent concerts could be, how the music industry had turned into a source of annoyance from which she was unable to escape, and how difficult it was to live up to everyone's expectations of her. Even though she was just 27 years old, her statements carried the weight of an older person who had been dragged in too many different directions. The atmosphere softened as Cavett listened to her and referred to her as his little songbird. Because Music captured not only a singer but also a lady who continued to battle for her work despite the world's attempts to undermine her, that interview endured for decades. Few hosts have ever able to equal Cavett's ability to connect with musicians. He spoke to them with respect rather than intimidation or flattery, and he treated them like humans rather than famous people. Artists like Hrix and Joplin were able to express themselves in ways that they had not previously done. His humor crept in subtly. His genuine curiosity fostered an environment where candor flowed easily. He didn't perform for musicians, so they trusted him. He spoke to them. His interviews became renowned because of the small change in tone, which also fostered friendships. But there were repercussions for Cavett's candor. He ended up on Richard Nixon's enemies list in the early 1970s. Nixon made 26 references to Kid on the Watergate tapes because his show frequently featured anti-war voices, which infuriated the White House. Following a contentious dispute between John O'Neill and John Kerry in June 1971, Nixon inquired as to whether they could endanger Cavett's career. When Cavett asked Daniel Ellsberg to discuss the Pentagon Papers in a program that attracted over 12 million viewers, the animosity became even more intense. Cavett became an unusual emblem of media resistance because of his determination in refusing to stay away from problematic visitors. John Kerry's discussion with John O'Neill on Cavett's stage on June 30, 1971, was one of the most talked about events of that era. While O'Neill found it difficult to respond without coming across as rehearsed, Kerr's composed comments cut through the clamor surrounding the Vietnam War. The change was felt by the people. Kerry's ability to talk as both an activist and a veteran gave him an advantage, according to reporters. Nixon became more and more irate as he listened to the dispute on the tapes, Music. The incident, which transpired directly under Cavett's lights, turned out to be a watershed in public opinion. The arrival of Norman Moore and Gore Vidal on the show on December 15, 1971, created a different kind of tempest. When Mailer headbutted Vidal backstage, their feud had already erupted, and the anger carried over onto the stage. Like weapons, they traded insults. Moore boasted about how smart he was. Words failed Norman Moore, Vidal replied with a giggle. Despite his best efforts to keep the show on course, Cavett ended up adding his own lines to the conflict. The next morning, the altercation made headlines in newspapers, adding a peculiar blend of humor and animosity to television history. Cavett retaliated against ABC in February 1971 for a two-part pornographic broadcast. By eliminating the term oral genital sex from the initial broadcast, the network attempted to censor it. In response, Cavett argued that the censorship was superfluous. He purposefully repeated the line while outlining the circumstances to the audience the very next evening in Music. ABC left it in this time because it featured a late-night host who was prepared to break the rules in front of the audience. The incident garnered national notice. Frank Sinatra and other music icons were mentioned in stories about Cavett. According to one report, Sinatra demanded that the network fire Music Cavett's head writer before he would even entertain the idea of doing so. Cavett quipped that if the story were accurate, the interview would become the most costly one ever recorded, but he never verified the specifics. Although Sinatra never appeared with him on TV, Cavett kept bringing in daring guests who weren't afraid to take on difficult subjects. The career of Cavett started to wane by the middle of the 1970s. In 1975, ABC canceled his program. Additionally, he never attained the same cultural pinnacle despite moving via PBS, USA Network, and CNBC. His quiet, cerebral music style became more difficult to promote as audiences shifted toward louder, faster entertainment. He never stopped working, though. He continued to write, to lecture, and to appear in settings where meaningful discourse was still important. His life took yet another unexpected turn in 1980. He experienced a serious depression episode while on a Concorde flight. His entire body trembled. He had to be taken off the aircraft because he started to perspire. After receiving a serious depression diagnosis from Columbia Presbyterian doctors, he later had electroconvulsive therapy. He informed his wife that he felt like he had come back to reality when he woke up from treatment. He was inspired by that experience to talk candidly about mental health, which helped dispel some of the stigma associated with depression. Then, on March 18, 1997, Tick Hall, the Montauk estate he and his wife Carrie Nye shared, was devastated by fire. All that remained of the house was music, a brick chimney as flames raced through it. In one afternoon, letters, autographed books, photos, memories, Oni Cole's dance shoes, and more vanished. According to Kit, the loss ended a chapter that felt irreplaceable and rocked him in a way he had never felt before. Carrie would not allow that chapter to end. She demanded that the house be restored in its original form. She relied on recollection, ashes, and details gleaned from what little was left because there were no blueprints and very few surviving photos. Alongside her, architect James Hadley and caregiver Gregory Dona worked, music, and eventually Tick Hall rose once more. The journey was chronicled in a documentary titled From the Ashes, which demonstrated the love and tenacity that went into each component of the project. Carrie Nye passed away from lung cancer on July 14, 2006, at the age of 69. Cavett claimed that her long-standing smoking habit had now caught up with her. Her death brought an end to a 42-year marriage that was full of humor, inventiveness, and close companionship, despite her repeated attempts to quit. The years that followed were marked by the weight of that loss, which he quietly carried. He wed novelist Martha Rogers in New Orleans in 2010. His life became more stable after getting married. He took up the role of stepfather to her 2 kids, and they settled into a more sedate routine in Connecticut. Even as his pace slowed with age, he found new meaning in writing and conversation. At the age of 83, Cavett suffered a stroke in 2020. It reduced his range of motion and forced him to use a cane or walker. Even though the encounter had an impact on his life, he later quipped that he didn't feel permanently hurt. He continued to speak about resilience with the same dry humor that characterized his career, and he remained sharp, possibly sharper than many realized. He sold Tick Hall for $23.6 million in 2021. $62 million was the initial asking price. However, he accepted the offer after 6 years of being on the market. There was more to it than just a sale. It was a farewell. Letting rid of the house meant ending a lengthy chapter that had been filled with both happiness and heartache. Ocean winds had sculpted its walls, celebrities had passed through its halls, and memories had stuck, sewn, to every nook and cranny. It was now someone else's, and Cavett had just what the years had chiseled into him.